John Calvin was born in 1509 in Noyon, France, into a household deeply connected to the local church. From an early age, he was immersed in classical education, trained in Latin, philosophy, and theology under the influence of Renaissance humanism. Originally destined for the priesthood, Calvin shifted direction at his father's urging and began studying law at Orléans and Bourges. Yet, even as he pursued legal studies, Calvin remained fascinated by scripture and theology. He taught himself Hebrew to read the Bible in its original form and engaged with the writings of the early church fathers and reformers, laying the foundation for the work that would define his life. Around 1530, Calvin underwent a profound personal conversion. Though he did not dwell much on the details, he described it as God subduing his heart into obedience, a decisive turning point. He became fully committed to the core convictions of the Protestant Reformation, including sola scriptura, the belief that Scripture alone is the authority for faith and life, and justification by faith. He wrote, "My heart I offer to you, Lord, promptly and sincerely," a motto that would shape his life's mission. As the Reformation swept through France, Calvin's growing alignment with Protestant ideas forced him into hiding, and in 1533 he fled Paris due to his association with reformist thinkers. While in exile in Basel, Switzerland, Calvin published the first edition of his Institutes of the Christian Religion in 1536. It was a modest book at first, but it powerfully summarized Protestant theology and was written with both clarity and conviction. Over the next 2 decades, Calvin revised and expanded it into one of the most comprehensive theological systems of the Reformation. The final edition, published in 1559, became a defining text of the Reformed tradition, not only shaping doctrine, but also offering a blueprint for worship, church government, and Christian living. He saw all creation as testifying to God's glory, once writing, "There is not one blade of grass, there is no color in this world that is not intended to make us rejoice." In the summer of 1536, Calvin passed through Geneva on his way to Strasbourg. He had no plans to stay, but William Farel, the city's fiery reformer, saw in Calvin the ideal partner to solidify Geneva's Protestant identity. Farel pleaded with him to remain, warning that God would curse his studies and rest if he turned away from the work of reform. Calvin, longing for a quiet life of study, was shaken. Yet he yielded to what he believed was God's call. "I will remain at Geneva. I will give myself up to the Lord's good pleasure." Thus began Calvin's public ministry. He and Farel set about transforming Geneva's church and society. They abolished Catholic practices, instituted a new liturgy centered on preaching, corporate singing of metrical psalms, and the regular celebration of the Lord's Supper. Calvin believed worship should be governed solely by Scripture and simplified to reflect God's majesty and holiness. True wisdom consists in 2 things, knowledge of God and knowledge of self, he taught, seeking to draw worshipers into a deep reverence for God and honest self-examination. However, Calvin's reforms quickly brought him into conflict with Geneva's civil authorities. A major source of tension was the consistory, a church body that enforced moral discipline, including the right to excommunicate unrepentant sinners. The city council resisted this level of ecclesiastical authority. In 1538, both Calvin and Farel were expelled from Geneva. Calvin found refuge in Strasbourg, where he pastored a congregation of French-speaking refugees and experienced personal and ministerial growth. There he married Idelette de Bure, a widow with children, and forged relationships with leading reformers like Martin Bucer, Heinrich Bullinger, and Philip Melanchthon. His sermons, writings, and letters from this period reflect a growing pastoral heart and theological maturity. He emphasized Christian charity and community, writing, "All the blessings we enjoy are divine deposits committed to our trust on this condition, that they should be dispensed for the benefit of our neighbors." In 1541, Geneva called Calvin back. This time, the city was ready to accept the institutional changes he envisioned. He returned with a structured plan for church governance, laid out in the ecclesiastical ordinances. The church was organized around 4 offices: pastors, teachers, elders, and deacons, each with specific roles in the life of the community. Central to Calvin's plan was the consistory, a church court responsible for maintaining spiritual discipline. It was not merely punitive. Calvin viewed it as an instrument of care and restoration. He also established educational reforms, culminating in the founding of the Geneva Academy in 1559, which trained ministers from across Europe to spread the Reformed faith. Calvin's vision for a disciplined and faithful church came under fierce attack from a political faction known as the Libertines. These powerful Genevan families resented Calvin's spiritual authority and rejected the idea that church leaders could restrict their behavior. At the heart of their conflict was the Lord's Supper. The Libertines insisted on their right to participate regardless of conduct, but Calvin held firm: the table was not to be profaned. When the city council ordered him in 1553 to admit excommunicated individuals, including Philibert Berthelier, to communion, Calvin refused. On the day of communion at St. Pierre Cathedral, he stood before the congregation and declared, "These hands you may crush, these arms you may lop off, my life you may take, but you shall never force me to give holy things to the profaned." His defiance prevailed, and eventually the consistory's authority was reaffirmed. By 1555, Calvin's supporters had taken control of Geneva's council, and the Libertines were exiled or executed after a failed uprising. That same year, Calvin became entangled in one of the darkest episodes of his ministry, the execution of Michael Servetus. Servetus, a Spanish physician and theologian, had long denied the Trinity and ridiculed infant baptism. Already condemned by Catholic authorities, Servetus came to Geneva in 1553, where he was arrested. Calvin, who had previously warned Servetus not to come, played a leading role in his prosecution. While Calvin urged a more humane form of execution, beheading, the council, still partially influenced by Calvin's political opponents, insisted on burning. The execution drew widespread criticism, igniting fierce debate over religious liberty. Calvin stood by his actions, convinced that heresy endangered the soul and society alike. "A dog barks when his master is attacked," he said. "I would be a coward if I saw that God's truth is attacked and yet would remain silent." Despite the controversies, Calvin's theological output was vast and enduring. Beyond the Institutes, he authored commentaries on nearly every book of the Bible, offering clear, insightful, and deeply pastoral exposition. He also wrote catechisms, liturgies, and theological treatises. He believed theology was not abstract theory, but a call to live visibly under Christ's lordship. We must make the invisible kingdom visible in our midst. Personally, Calvin was both warm and unbending. He opened his home to exiles, students, and colleagues, yet remained fiercely committed to doctrinal purity and moral accountability. His letters reveal both compassion and discipline. He worked tirelessly, even as he suffered from migraines, kidney stones, tuberculosis, and other chronic illnesses. He continued preaching and writing until shortly before his death in 1564. Calvin requested no monument or elaborate funeral. In death, as in life, he sought no personal glory. He was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in Geneva, leaving behind no shrine but a global theological legacy. Leadership of the Genevan Church passed to Theodore Beza, his devoted colleague, ensuring the continuity of his reforms. Calvin's impact on Christianity cannot be overstated. He helped shape the doctrine, worship, and government of Reformed churches across Europe and beyond. His teachings laid theological foundations that influenced nations, redefined church-state relationships, and reshaped Christian education. His legacy lives on in Presbyterianism, the Reformed tradition, and every heart still moved by the words he once wrote. "We are not our own. Let not our reason nor our will therefore sway our plans and deeds. We are not our own. Let us therefore forget ourselves and all that is ours." Don't miss tomorrow's insight. More history, more theology. Subscribe now.